Hello again, here I am. So resources are so scarce for companies in general and even more for startups, but what am I telling you that you don't know? Nevertheless, companies continue to look the other way and waste powerful, effective, and fully available factors to boost their success. We don't want that to happen to our companies. In a September 2019 study by the FCLT Global on predicting long-term success for corporations and investors worldwide, gender diversity in corporations is one clearly identifiable factor that leverages companies' return on invested capital with an 8% weight on explaining the reasons for companies' superior return on invested capital. In a context of global scarcity, not considering and using effective available resources has an even greater cost to all company stakeholders. For those that are joining us now, my name is Anna Paula Reich, and I am partner at e-Bynd BC. The next session will consist of an approximately 30 minutes presentation, followed by 15 minutes Q&A. Please don't forget to post your questions in the Q&A or chat areas. So, it is my great pleasure to introduce Saniye Gulser Corat, Director of Division for Gender Equality at the Cabinet of the Director General at UNESCO, to talk to us on diversity as a fundamental for startup success. Gulser is Director for Gender Equality since September 2004. Pioneering in making gender equality a global priority in UNESCO in 2007. She is a senior international development executive with 30 years of public, private sector, and academic experience, specialized in driving innovation and change with impact. Gulser is also the founder and CEO of an international consulting company in Canada. She holds postgraduate degrees from Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Business School, and graduate degrees from the College of Europe in Bruges, Belgium, Norman Pattison School of International Affairs and Political Science Department at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. She received her BA at the Boğaziçi University after completing high school at Robert College in Istanbul, Turkey. It is a real pleasure to welcome you, my dear Gulser. The session is now yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for this warm welcome. Greetings to everybody. It's a real honor and a pleasure for me to connect with all of you.
Gulser, sorry, could you please put your video on? We can't see you now.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Sorry, hi. So it's a great pleasure to join all of you today, and I'm joining you from Paris, France. It's almost early evening, and we are just coming out of a 7-week total lockdown. So it's really nice to have this connection. As Anna briefly mentioned, I have spent the last 35, 40 years of my life zigzagging between continents and working in over 30 countries for different lengths of time, always with multicultural, multilinguistic, and multidisciplinary teams. So I always had a deep interest in and a passion for diversity, even before it became. Diversity and inclusion have become one of the hottest topics of recent years, especially in human resource policies. But in reality, diversity is more than HR. It is one of the core elements of any business strategy. Today, we have really substantive evidence that companies that embrace diversity in their business strategies and include it in all aspects of their business statistically outperform their peers. In this short presentation, I will focus on what happens when gender diversity is missing, using the specific example of the technology sector, as I think many companies which are represented here are from that sector. And then I will tell you a little bit about the benefits of gender diversity and conclude with some basic steps to consider in order to achieve it. In the example that I use, I will make use of the research and the findings of UNESCO, which started in 2017 on the digital gender gap, and which culminated with the publication of a very popular, very well-received report called I'd Blush If I Could. The cover page of the report is up on the screen now. It was published in March 2019 and created a big momentum and a really useful conversation on technology sector and the digital gender gap. The report is available on our website, so if you want to take a look, please do so. It exposes some of the gender biases apparent in digital education, which then pervade the technology sector and are coded into technology products. In the report, we provide recommendations to the private sector, among others, because we do have a wide range of stakeholders, in order to reset gendered views of technology. Let me tell you a little bit about the gender diversity situation in technology startups today. The main point to keep in mind is that women are missing at all levels of the technology sector. They are missing from the applicant pool. Only 1% of applicants for technical jobs in artificial intelligence and data science are women. They are missing from technical teams. Only 22% of AI professionals are women. They are missing in the C-suite and the corporate boards of companies in the technology sector. 60% of American startups have no women at all in the C-suite or on the board of directors. And in recent years, we are hearing stories about the problem with that state of affairs through some of the sensational practices that women write about. Women are also missing as inventors and patent holders. Across the G20 countries, just 7% of information and communication technology patents are generated by women. When you look at the global figures, it's even lower at only 2%. Women are missing as recipients of seed funding and investment, which I think is very important for the group gathered here. We have studies which show that women startups or startups owned by women receive much less funding than those by men. And even though, and I think this is the important point, female-led companies provide a higher return of investment. In the particular study where I have figures, it shows that female startups made 78 cents per dollar provided, as opposed to male-founded companies which generated 31 cents. But when you look at the investment levels, it's really very, very low for women-led startups. Women are also missing as investors. Only 65% of US venture capital firms have female partners, and 78% of partners at US venture capital firms are male. Finally, and very importantly, the technology sector struggles to retain the women that do make it, that do enter the sector. More than half of women in technology will leave their positions by the time they reach mid-career level, and they are also more than twice as likely as men to leave the tech sector. I'll tell you a little bit about the reasons for that after I tell you about the digital gender divide, which starts as a pipeline problem. It's the difference between men and women and in their ability to access and use digital technologies. Initially, the digital gender gap was the result of access issues, hardware issues, but more recently, and as our research showed, it's the skills gap that has eclipsed the barriers of access as the primary contributor to the digital gender divide. What it basically does is a high digital access and skills gap in the education system leads to a low female pool of talent in technology areas, which in turn leads to the gross underrepresentation of women in the technology sector with the resulting gender diversity gap. Now, I want to put in a word of caution. Technology companies should not really use the pipeline argument to justify the existing gender gap. Indeed, the problem isn't just that there aren't enough women in the talent pool. The problem, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is also that technology companies fail to attract and retain female talent. What are some of the reasons for that? Well, women leave technology companies because they are treated unfairly. They are underpaid. 60% of the time, men are offered higher salaries than women for the same role in the same company. Women are less likely to be promoted. A survey of 4,000 women who recently changed companies shows that they left their jobs because of a concern for the lack of advancement opportunity. They have a harder time, women have a harder time being promoted because they are also often excluded from more creative, innovative roles and instead channeled into less fulfilling execution roles. Another interesting research from Stanford University found that women are more likely to receive vague, useless feedback on their performance evaluations, whereas men receive concrete, actionable advice that helps them get ahead. In the tech industry, women are also at times confronted with a workplace culture that is often exclusionary and one that perpetuates bias. They face isolation and they are excluded from networks among their peers, partly because of lack of female role models. In a survey of 2,600 technology workers, 65% of women said that they felt discriminated against in the workplace in the last 5 years because of their gender. When asked the same question of discrimination, only 11% of men respond positively. So in 2020, this is a really serious issue that needs to be looked at very carefully. Finally, women are missing from the technology sector because of unconscious biases that we all have. For example, when women and men negotiate a job offer by reading identical scripts for a Harvard study, women who asked for higher salary were rated as being more difficult to work with and less nice as persons, but men were not received negatively for negotiating. In the case of investors and entrepreneurship, investors apparently prefer entrepreneurial ventures pitched by a man than an identical pitch from a woman by a rate of 68% to 32%. And this is a study that was conducted jointly by Harvard Business School, Wharton, and MIT Sloan. So in an interesting way, male narrated pitches were rated as more persuasive, more logical, and more fact-based than the exact pitches that were narrated by a female voice. So these are really interesting findings, which are being supported and substantiated by a lot of similar studies in other sectors as well. Because behavioral science is really looking at this issue of unconscious bias. Related to unconscious bias, I want to talk a little bit about gender diversity and its importance for startup success by using some of the examples from our research and our report that I mentioned before. I'd blush if I could. The conclusion of our report, the short conclusion of our report is that technology developed by a homogeneous group of individuals is more likely to contain bias. emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, are mostly being developed by young Caucasian and Asian males with unconscious bias in their socialization and education backgrounds. Unfortunately, their biases are encoded into new technologies with the potential of spreading and reinforcing harmful gender stereotypes and further stigmatizing and marginalizing women, not only from the technology sector, but also from society at large. In our research, we used the example of AI-powered voice assistants. And our report showed that negative gender biases are specifically reflected in the names, voices, and behavior of current AI voice assistant technology. To start with, most voice assistants have female names. The most well-known ones that dominate the sector, Amazon has Alexa, named for the ancient library in Alexandria. Apple has Siri, coined by the Norwegian co-creator of the iPhone 4S, which apparently means beautiful woman who leads you to victory in Norse language. And most concerning, Microsoft named its voice assistant Cortana after a synthetic intelligence in the video game Halo that projects itself as a sensuous naked woman. Secondly, we found that most leading assistants have exclusively female or female by default voices. Siri, Cortana, Alexa, and Google Assistant were all exclusively female at release. A male option was added to Siri in 2013, for Google Assistant in 2017, and for Cortana in 2019. To this day, Alexa is still exclusively female. But the part of our research that created the most sensation and the most media interest was our finding regarding the way female digital assistants respond to verbal abuse and how they differentiate between verbal abuse from men versus from women. Beyond engaging and sometimes even thanking users for sexual harassment, voice assistants seem to show a greater tolerance towards sexual advances from men than from women. Siri, for example, responded provocatively to requests for sexual favors by men by saying things like, "Oh, now, I'd blush if I could, your language." In fact, the title of our report came from one of the responses Siri gave to sexual abuse, "I would blush if I could." But when it was women who made those comments, the responses from the voice assistants were more direct and more less accommodating, such as, "That's not nice, I'm not that kind of personal assistant," and the like. Now, I have to mention that the responses of some voice assistants have been updated since our research, and many companies continue to look at their applications and make corrections. But what we find is that these corrections, these modifications, fall short of pushing back against insults. They very rarely label speech as inappropriate, no matter how obscene an insult is. Automatic speech recognition technology, which is also used by digital voice assistants, shows that this particular technology tends to be more accurate for men than for women. In fact, the speech recognition works even less well for women of color and women speaking with regional accents. One of the questions we explored in our research focused on the causes of gender biases in AI-powered voice assistants. Again, the first answer was that women are missing from the technology sector because of the digital gender divide. We also found that some of the biases come from the fact that the data sets that are used to train and feed the algorithms that power these technologies are biased themselves. While the algorithms that drive AI may appear to be neutral, the data that shapes the outcomes of those algorithms is often biased in one way or another. For example, a voice data set can mostly contain voices of white males while underrepresenting the speech patterns of various minority groups. Ultimately, though, the biases found in data sets tend to reflect biases entrenched within our societies. The teams of engineers, which are mostly made up of white and Asian males, as I mentioned before, can be the source of these biases, but so too can the general public. This is not to say that sexism in individual companies is by choice or intentional, but most decisions are the result of market research, so they may be reflecting gender stereotypes that already exist in the general public. Unfortunately, the impact of these gender biases go far beyond the technology sector and far beyond the voice assistants. What is happening through these voice assistants and AI-powered systems is that gendered digital assistants are replicating and reinforcing biases that already exist in our societies, because they send messages about how women and girls should respond to sexual innuendo and abuse, how women and girls should think about their bodies, but most importantly, and this is the shocking part of our research, how young people should interact with girls and women. The increasing prevalence of digital voice assistants is making it very urgent that we address this issue. Smart speakers are now the 7th and most used device on a daily basis. And it was predicted a few years ago that by 2020, many people will have more conversations with digital assistants than with their partners. And this is happening. And I think with the COVID-19 and the confinement situation, it has gotten even worse. Now back to the startups and the benefits of gender diversity for startup success. Let me give you a few of the reasons why it is very important to have diverse teams, because diverse companies perform better financially. By the way, the image you see on your screen is the Cortana, where the Cortana name was taken from by Microsoft. So diverse companies perform better financially, and this is evidenced by all the publications that come from the sector itself, as well as McKinsey. Diversity also leads to increased creativity, innovation, and collective intelligence. An OECD study found that inventions arising out of mixed teams appear to have wider technological breadth and higher impact from a technological viewpoint than those in which only men are involved. Diversity leads to greater customer insight. Let's not forget that half of the world's consumers of technology are women, yet they are currently underserved. Companies that recruit only male developers risk designing products that fail to maximize their potential. Increasing diversity also helps companies overcome the technology skills shortage. Demand for advanced IT and programming skills will grow by as much as 90% over the next 15 years. So business leaders across the sectors are already reporting an expected technical skills shortage in their companies within the next 3 years. And to stay ahead, the tech sector needs to rapidly expand its talent pool by attracting and retaining more women. Diversity also helps companies attract top talent. The millennials, who form the main group of interest for many startups, they prefer an employer with a policy, which has a policy on diversity, equality, and workforce inclusion. It's a very important factor for them. As the workplace becomes more populated with millennials and the generation Z, employers risk missing out on top talent if they are diverse and inclusive. Last but not least, female brain drain. All those women who enter the technology sector but then who leave, it's costly. It costs a lot of money. The business cost of replacing employees is significant. On average, it costs employers 33% of a worker's annual salary to hire a replacement if that worker leaves. So it's important not only to recruit women, but also have the correct policies and practices in the workplace so that they can stay in that company. A few thoughts on what companies can do, especially what startups can do to increase gender diversity. These are not meant to be comprehensive because as UNESCO, we are not in the business of giving advice and working with the private sector in general. Most of our work is directed to governments and ministries. But since we have started this conversation on technology, gender, digital divide, we have been doing some work on this area as well and connecting with the private sector. So let me give you some of the lessons we learned and some of the suggestions we have. The first one is make fewer assumptions. Do not think that you know what the women need to work for your company or to stay for your company. The best way to retain the women in your company is to ask them what needs to change in order for them to stay. Secondly, leadership has to be very clear about the intention for diversity. They have to set the values and the culture of a company so there will not be real diversity at the top if it's not at the top level. And just let me say in that respect that hiring a chief diversity officer, which is something that many companies are doing right now, will not fix your company's diversity problem if it doesn't come with real company-wide determination to change how things are done. How you can change the way things are done? Well, training your managers and your staff about unconscious biases and sexual harassment, these are important. Giving professional and financial incentives for diversity usually works even better than training. Eliminating gender bias in recruitment and promotion practices is really important. It's important to make sure that your recruitment and promotion processes do not favor male candidates over equally or more qualified women, either consciously or unconsciously. So to prevent this from happening, you can explore some of the new platforms that can help you remove bias from HR procedures. Gendered language in job postings is also a red flag for women who do not want to work for workplaces that are not diverse. So avoid using gendered words and phrases to make sure that you also attract women as applicants. One thing that is very important and we really saw in action at UNESCO is to have hiring targets and putting in place mechanisms that would allow you to reach those targets. Because without targets and without a timeline, one doesn't know if one is making progress towards the objective that is set. So setting targets, numerical targets and setting timelines, I would say are really critical. And we did that at UNESCO. When I started working for UNESCO in 2004, the percentage of women in decision-making levels was around 9%. We set a target of reaching 50% by 2015. And I'm very happy to report to you that in 2015, we reached 48%, not quite 50. But since 2017, we are at 50% from time to time, going above 50, but never going below. Other measures that can be taken include making the company culture and company policies more inclusive by, for example, supporting women with children and supporting dual career couples, making company networking events more inclusive to make sure that groups that feel they are in the minority can see themselves in these events and participate. Not perpetuating harmful stereotypes is really, really important. Especially in the technology-related fields, there is the assumption that the innate genius or the knack for entrepreneurship are qualities that are more common in men because of some of the leading figures in the technology area, like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. But genius is not really a male trait, and even though it is seen culturally as one, these stereotypes tend to favor tend to favor men and turn women away from the industry. It's also important to engage everybody on the issue of gender equality and gender diversity. We have a tendency, or in the past it has worked in the way that it's more often than not women who are made responsible for achieving gender equality, gender diversity, and when conversations happen around these issues, it's more often than not, again, women who end up talking to each other. So it's really important that everybody takes this as an issue for all and works to achieve it together. Another very important practical measure I will recommend is to monitoring and auditing your data to measure progress towards diversity and inclusion. Because if you do not monitor and if you do not see when you are doing well and when you are not, you will not have the possibility to make changes and improve practices and policies. Again, at UNESCO, we did that. We were able, because we are required to report to our governing body, which is composed of our 193 member states, every 6 months on the situation regarding gender balance of our workforce, as well as geographical balance of our workforce, because we are an international United Nations agency. We were able to see when we were making progress and when we were not. And when we were not, we really looked into the reasons of setbacks. So monitoring, auditing, and reporting are very, very important. We also have some recommendations to help work with the private sector to close the digital gender divide. Looking at the time, I can see that I already passed the half hour.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'll stop here.
Okay.
We have the PowerPoint, which I hope will be made available, so you can read some of these recommendations in your spare time and at your own pace.
Thank you very much. We have 2 questions from the audience. So one coming from Belaine, who says, apart from the deep thoughts that your presentation is raising and the practical consequences that we take away, do you think that assistance personalization is a way to overcome this problem in our technology?
Is the question the depersonalization of the voice assistants? Did I understand it correctly?
No, if assistance personalization can be a way to overcome this problem.
Well, one of the recommendations we make in our report is to make these voice assistants less human. Unfortunately, the trend in the sector at the moment is towards making them more human. But what we are proposing is that it should be the reverse, making them less human, because after all, these are machines. These are machines that process data in a very speedy manner. but they are machines. And I think it's important not to lose the distinction between human and machine. Our recommendation is in fact to find the genderless voices, which is one option. And some companies are trying to do that. There are a few examples already out in the market. But also dehumanizing these artificial intelligence powered voice assistants. So that would be, that is the finding, and that is the recommendation from our research.
Okay, so we have another question from Teresa Van Orl, asking your opinions on what can the European governments do to attract more girls to computer science courses and pursue tech careers, and how to make tech jobs more attractive for women. And I know that this last question is something that concerns other participants as well from some comments that we are having in here.
Yes, in fact, the part of the presentation that I skipped at the end has many very concrete recommendations about the private sector helping close the digital gender gap. As UNESCO, we are working with governments and with ministries of education, as well as ministries of technology, to see how more girls can be attracted to and can be retained in studies that are related to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But what we need to do is, it's not only in the formal learning environments, but we also need to make use of non-formal and informal working environments to push for girls and women to get more digital skills. Private sector companies have a big role to play. As I mentioned, we do have very specific recommendations. There are many companies which are already establishing partnerships with local governments, local education institutions to teach girls how to code, to teach girls and women digital skills. So we should continue with those. But one element we find very, very effective is providing role models for girls. We did another research a few years ago on the reasons for girls dropping out of STEM studies, science, technology, engineering, mathematics studies. And the reasons are complex and change from one context to another. But there is a lot of peer pressure because girls drop out of science, technology in the transition to puberty. And it has a lot to do with wanting to be attractive, wanting to belong, wanting to be part of a group. So girls who are interested in science, technology related fields are seen to be less attractive, more like geeks, if I can use that term. So it's really important to show girls that you can be a woman and a scientist and have a fulfilling and social life with your friends and others. In that respect, we have a program that's been running for 20 years now, over 20 years. We have a program called UNESCO L'Oréal Women in Science, which basically showcases successful women scientists and rewards them for their achievements, while at the same time creating networks with those accomplished women scientists, with younger women studying science at their graduate and undergraduate levels. So role models have a lot to do with making girls want to do something. One example I always use is until women started to be elected as presidents and political leaders, it wasn't a career choice for many young women and girls. But now, especially with COVID-19, when we keep reading about the success of women political leaders, I think we are inspiring a lot of women and young women to get engaged in politics. It's the same with technology.
Gulser, we have a last question from the audience, from Roland da Silva, who is also asking whether, I mean, UNESCO being a global organization, what you have to say about all other types of diversity, in knowing that you're responsible for gender equality, of course.
Yes.
Can you just give us a brief view?
Yes. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are many elements of diversity, from age to ethnicity, religion, experience, socioeconomic background, and I listed those in the beginning of my presentation. The reason I focus on gender diversity is because that's my job description at UNESCO. I am the director for gender equality, which is one of 2 global priorities of the organization. The second global priority is Africa. So I primarily worked on gender diversity, but of course we have a very broad definition of gender. We talk about different gender identities, different sexual orientations. So gender is not women and men, although in the presentation for practical purposes, I focused more on women missing from the technology sector. But in fact, even the concept of gender is much broader than this simple binary relationship that I focused on during this presentation. Of course, diversity has a lot of other components, and in the United States, for example, for the technology sector, along with gender, the other most important diversity issue is race. So I do acknowledge that it is the result of the focus of my work.
Gulser, thank you very much. It was a privilege having you with us and providing such insights into such a powerful success fundamental. And as I mentioned, we need to take all the resources now as ever, but now more than ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of this 2 days of our 4 top experts webinars, hoping that you all enjoyed it and have taken some reflection points to leverage your journey. Tomorrow and Thursday, we will have our Startup Peaches starting at 2:30 p.m. Lisbon, London time. And I hope to see you all there. Take care. See you tomorrow.